On this week's Tuesday Talk, we are discussing boondocking, what it is, pros and cons, and how it's different from staying in an RV park.
Let's go.
So what's boondocking?
Boondocking is staying out like we are now in the middle of nowhere, for the most part. I can't see a single structure in 360 degrees around the Airstream. Now, you don't necessarily have to be out in the middle of nowhere to boondock. Most boondocking is, or at least in the wilderness. No hookups, no electric, no sewer, no water. You're living entirely off of what you provide or what you can store in your trailer or fifth wheel, whatever that happens to be. So it's really off-grid living, typically out in wilderness.
Though you will hear people say that they boondock in Walmart parking lots and things like that. So I think the common definition is no hookups and you're completely off grid. But most of us, when we say it, mean in the middle of nowhere or in wilderness of some sort.
And then there's another related term called dry camping, which essentially means the same thing. You're dry, so you aren't hooked up to city-powered water and things like that. So those terms can typically be used interchangeably.
One thing with dry camping is sometimes you'll find dry camping campgrounds where they will charge you for dry camping. You don't normally get charged for boondocking. And sometimes there'll be actual sites for dry camping.
We're going to one of those sites in a week and a half or so.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
So why do we like boondocking? We like boondocking because, one, it's free. But that's a big factor, but the reason why that matters is because we can live off-grid. We don't need electricity unless it's really hot. We have a great water supply, and we can be frugal with our water, which we'll share some tips on that as we do more boondocking. We have our composting toilet, so we haven't had to empty our tanks once since we started this whole trip. So we can live.
That's really nice.
Yeah, so we can live totally off grid. So why pay for things we don't need? So that's why it's nice that it's free. It also makes it so that we can live very cheaply and stick to the budget and splurge and go to campgrounds occasionally that otherwise would be kind of pricey.
And we like just being out in the middle of nowhere when you don't hear a car. Well, here you will hear an occasional car, but I mean, you're not in a city. You don't have the industry that you're listening to in commerce. You're just you're out in the middle of nowhere. You're out in the middle of nature. You hear the birds. You listen to the wind. That kind of thing. And,
yeah.
And that's really nice.
And like you said, we're not hearing trains and everything else. It depends on the boondocking site. You might hear highways. It all depends on what you're looking for. Mm-hmm. Besides being out in nature, it also means you can get closer to a lot of the natural sites that otherwise you would have to pay an arm and a leg to be near. So you can find boondocking outside of Zion. You can find boondocking outside of St. George. So we are 7 minutes from Steve's parents' house, and we're staying for free. We can't do that with a campground. There just isn't a campground to do that with. You're not right next to your neighbor. So in the KOA, you were right next to your neighbor. When the kids were playing, they were playing. When they were playing loud music, they were playing loud music. When they emptied their tanks, you smelt it. So
yeah, that definitely happens.
Some campgrounds you have a little more space, but here
you get to spread out. Yeah, we get to allow the dogs to run off leash. They love to explore.
Yes, we keep an eye on them.
You cannot do that in a campground, much less a city.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that's why we like boondocking. It gives us more freedom. That is a big thing. There are some negatives. We're currently boondocking on BLM land. There are other things you can do on BLM land.
Bureau of Land Management
yes.
is what BLM land means, by the way. And one of the things you can do on BLM land is target shoot. So if you have guns, handguns, rifles, shotgun, whatever, you'd bring it out to BLM land, find a safe place with a nice big backdrop. I showed you I think a shooting spot here, in fact, a couple videos ago, where you could just go out and just shoot into this backdrop. There are also campers around that same area. In fact, we are just up the hill from a couple of shooting spots. So in the middle of the day and sometimes in the evening, we will hear pop, pop, gunshots. But that might sound sound bad, but it's really not as bad as it may seem.
No.
I mean, there aren't just people walking around with loaded firearms. They are target shooting in a very specific area.
Yep.
And they are generally safe. There are exceptions, of course, but especially here, they are generally safe.
Yes.
So while you do hear an occasional gunshot, people aren't getting murdered. Criminal activity is not going
necessarily
on. They're
happening.
simply target shooting.
Yes.
And that's just something that you'll have to get used to if you choose to boondock on BLM land.
This is also a hotbed, it seems, for ATVs and off-road vehicles, so we get quite a few of those going past us. We get big trailers full of people with them coming past us in the morning. If we were to go a little bit farther down the road, it wouldn't be that big a deal, but where we're camped, we're close enough to the road that we have easy access to St. George, because that's what we want, and so we're going to have a little bit more of that road noise. But it doesn't really bother us.
Yeah, we don't mind being at least somewhat close to a road, because we feel that's a little bit safer. You have access to services if you really need them, without having to drive down a dirt road for 15 minutes before you get to a solid road. So we like she said, we don't mind that all that much. We feel a little bit more secure that way, at least for now.
In addition, some BLM spots will probably be really isolated, where you are out in the middle of nowhere with no one else. And that can be both amazing, and there can be a negative there because you are in the middle of nowhere with nowhere else. Here, I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can see 5 rigs from where I'm sitting. And that just gives a little bit, people are kind of looking out for each other. We recognize the trucks of the people who are currently camped here. And that kind of gives a little bit more security. They're far enough away that we can't hear them at night, but they're close enough that we can see them.
Yeah, our style is we don't mind seeing other rigs. We just don't want to be right next to them.
Yeah.
And this right here is a perfect spot for that.
Yes. So major differences between, say, boondocking and a campground. Obviously, you're not right next to your neighbor.
No services.
No services. There is a time limit in BLM land, at least. Usually it's 14 days. So after 14 days, we need to pick up and leave this spot and move at least, I think the rule is 17 miles away before we can camp on other BLM land for another 2 weeks. You could just go back and forth between 2 spots 17 miles apart if you really want to.
And some states will enforce that a little bit more strictly than others. We did see a park ranger here the other day, but other than that, we've seen nobody. I don't really think they care here.
No.
But you will find areas where they do, so just keep that in mind.
Especially like Quartzsite. So Quartzsite, most people know as being a major RV convergence site in the winter. During off-season for Quartzsite, I've been told that they could care less about how long you really stay there. But if you're there during December, January, February, you better only stay your 2 weeks and get your free permit because they patrol regularly. Because
it's the hot season.
Yeah, that's their hot season. So I think it probably depends.
Yeah.
So.
And, one more thing, internet access.
Yes.
If you're boondocking, if you're out on BLM land, the chances of you getting great 4G service probably isn't quite as good. So we have a 4G booster on top of our Airstream. We'll link to our install video.
Yep.
That is really, really helped. And we'll probably do another video, maybe a Friday favorite, on that later to give you some more specifics. But that's been awesome so far.
Yeah. So internet access, anything like that. You can look on Camp NDM or free campsites or things for BLM land or boondocking locations, and they will also tell you if people know what the service is like. So you can hear a little bit of road noise. Maybe there is a couple ATVs going by us.
Right behind.
People going to have some fun.
Our site, yeah.
So I think that's it for this week's Tuesday Talk about boondocking. If you have any questions about boondocking or our experiences so far, let us know. We've boondocked almost exclusively since we hit the road.
I think we've paid for 2 nights.
We've paid for 2 nights so far.
In 2 weeks.
And we're here for a while longer, and then we'll be heading to a dry camping spot in a state park here in Utah before boondocking some more. So we plan to do a lot of boondocking. So feel free.
Solar.
Yeah, I know.
Solar.
Feel free to leave us questions, leave us comments, let us know what you like or dislike about boondocking below. And as always, if you have another question for us regarding our life,
anything.
Yep.
We're open books.
Leave those in the comments below as well, and you might see them in a future Tuesday talk. And I
Sounds
think
good.
that's it. So as always, like, subscribe if you haven't already, and we will see you next week.
Yep. Bye.
Bye, guys.